Norman always propounded his theory that there were two types of learning, experiential and vicarious. In other words, you could do things the easy way, yourself, or you could learn from others. One day when I was about 14, Norman asked me to buy an inflatable raft at Paragon Sports on Union Square, and we went camping. Off we went up to Cape Cod, the two of us, talking and laughing, joking all the way. And when we set up camp in the middle of the woods, he explained to me that he was going to make a fire. He was going to show me how, but after that, I'd be the keeper of the flame. As keeper of the flame, he says, just keep the fire going so I could smoke my pot. So that brings us all here tonight. A man's last wish reveals so much of what he's about. His was that Harvey's dream was realized and Ron's final work would be published. And I have to thank Michael Smith for taking up that challenge. Tremendous force we all know and love. I don't think there's anyone else like him who's taken this whole off-Broadway village scene from the 60s and actually endured and made sure that Ron's work, as well as the work of other great playwrights, lived on. So, Michael Smith, thank you so much. And he, early on, said to me that he wanted Marc Siegel to do the forward, and I said, you know, I have Norman's director's note, and it's Norman's tribute to Harvey and Ron. Believe me, the forward is amazing for anybody like me who's kind of half knowledgeable of the whole situation. I highly recommend it. Obviously, all of you will read it eventually. It's here tonight. And so, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Marc Siegel.
Thank you, Dave, very much. I should just maybe just first say a couple words about who I am. I mean, there are notes in the programs, but well, as you can hear, perhaps from my accent, I'm American, but I live in Germany, and I teach and work there. I work as sometimes a curator and a scholar. And I actually didn't know Norman personally, but I have had many, a long email, a series of emails, email exchanges with Norman, mainly in relation to Ron Tavel, who I did know, and also in relation to Mario Montez, who I fortunately got to know as well, and was privileged enough to be able to convince to make appearances again, starting with a festival that I organized in 2009 in Berlin, a festival actually dedicated to Jack Smith, and for which we had brought Ronald Tavel as well. And Ron tragically died on the plane leaving the event that I co-organized in Berlin, which was quite a shock to all of us. And so it was all the more meaningful that Mario Montez then agreed to come out of retirement, so to speak, and make his first public appearances on stage as an homage to his old friend Ronald. So I've been involved here. Maybe I'll stand over here because I don't have like notes. I've been involved then both as a scholar and a curator, and I was asked then by Michael to write the intro for this book, the foreword, and immediately said yes because of my history with Ron. I'll tell you just a little bit about that, but I just wanted to just tell you a teensy little bit about this book. It's and what it means to me. I know it probably means something different to each of you, to many of you who knew Ron much better than I did, and to many of you who knew perhaps Harvey as well, and Norman. But for me, as a scholar, let's say, I found it essential that Ron Tavel's role in writing, directing the performances of his screenplays, in performing in Andy Warhol's films, that Ron's multifaceted involvement in, to my mind, some of the best of Andy Warhol's films be made evident in book form in Ron's own voice. I know through, so the book actually traces Ron's collaboration with Warhol from December 1964, when he was asked by Warhol to contribute something to the soundtrack of the film Harlot, and ended up engaging in an improvised conversation with Billy Name and Harry Fainlight. And then his collaboration continued until much later than people, at least in scholars, usually think. It continued until July of 1967, a full 3 years, in which Ron Tavel wrote actually 17 screenplays for Warhol. There were about 11 or 12 of them were actually filmed, but Warhol had asked Ron to write these additional screenplays with the idea that they would make the films, and for different reasons they didn't in the different cases. So what this book is a collection of Ron's introductions to the screenplays that he wrote, the 17 screenplays. And they're introductions that Ron wrote in the late 90s and early 2000s. So it was after he had time to reflect on his experiences. It was after he had time to read scholarship that he disagreed with, and makes that clear, to read criticism. And so in a sense, it's his own reckoning with Warhol, with whom he had a lot of conflict. And as probably many people in the room did as well. And also his reckoning with critics and scholars, in a sense to attempt to, let's say, set the record straight, if you will, at least from his perspective, about Andy Warhol's screenplays. What's, I think, worth pointing out is that most people, again, I'll say scholars or younger people coming to Warhol's work, don't even realize that there were screenplays. And for some of them, there weren't, but as, for instance, Bob Heide, who's here tonight, can attest. Bob Heide, who wrote at least one screenplay for Warhol, and whose play, The Bed, was also filmed then by Warhol. But Bob Heide wrote the screenplay for Lupe. A lot of people think that Warhol just simply turned on the camera and then left, and that people were just left to improvise. And Warhol, of course, fostered that impression. And so that, for someone like Tavel, who actually wrote dramatically structured, dialogue-driven screenplays, that misunderstanding was quite painful. And so he, I think, does a quite beautiful job at explaining how these screenplays came to be, and explaining also, in his inimitable style, he's a great storyteller. For those who knew Ron, he was quite an amazing storyteller. He tells the story of his emotional life during this process of collaboration, and the highs and lows of being involved in the factory, being involved with Warhol and others. There's also, in the book, I'm sorry, I'm like on some cheesy TV show doing a sales campaign right now, but since Michael Smith couldn't be here, I wanted to just properly draw attention to some of the aspects of the book that Michael so lovingly put together, Michael decided to include an essay by Ron called "The Roots of the Theater of the Ridiculous in the Scripted Films of Andy Warhol." And that essay, as the title maybe makes clear, is Ron's attempt also to intervene in theater history and to make clear something that often gets misunderstood, namely that the theater of the ridiculous that Ron and John Vaccaro brought to the stage, and Harvey Tavel also then contributed to as director, emerged out of Andy Warhol's films. As many of us know, the initial plays of the theater of the ridiculous were indeed Ronald Tavel screenplays. And because of, I mentioned in my introduction that perhaps hovering in the background of Ron's discontent is the incredible success and, to my mind, understandable success and respect that Charles Ludlam receives and that Charles Ludlam brought to the term ridiculous. And I think that for Ron, Charles Ludlam, Ron I'm sure would be really upset that I'm even mentioning Charles Ludlam here at this event, but he just gives him a really a minor footnote. But I do think that, that at least in terms of scholarship and history, that when one thinks of the ridiculous, one often thinks of Charles Ludlam, understandably so. But there are different strands to the ridiculous. And as, for instance, someone like Lola Pachulinski, who's here tonight, it's quite an honor for me also to speak in front of her, can attest. Yeah, so there are different strands to the theater of the ridiculous, and one of those strands, and one of the ideas of ridiculous, emerged out of Ronald Tavel's work with Warhol. And that's something that he tries to make clear in this book. I actually got to know Ron Tavel because I was doing research on his films, and then I was working with a group of artists and actors and scholars in Berlin, and we decided to invite Ron to participate in a theater project where we wanted to pay homage both to Jack Smith and to Carmen Miranda. And we decided to invite Ronald Tavel and also Vaginal Davis, wonderful actress, drag artist from Los Angeles, to invite them to Berlin to work with German performers in this crazy project that we did called Cheap Jewelry. Ron loved it. He wrote 2 dialogues for himself, and in just a second I'll show you a little clip from that production where you can see Ron briefly in action. When Ron was in Berlin, he was so moved by all of the crazy people that we had assembled around us, all of our friends, and that he said, we should really do a production of Juanita Castro with this group. I want Vaginal Davis to play Juanita, and Susanne Sachse, German actress who was in our group, to perform Fidel, and just the rest of the people in this production that we had called Cheap Jewelry, they should be the family. So we were able to arrange this, and Ron, of course, directed and played the on-screen director, on-stage director. So we did that in Berlin. It was a one, of course, like Juanita Castro, no rehearsals, a one-night only event, and it was an incredible success. Something, The Ridiculous had actually been in Germany back in the 70s. Some of Ron's work is translated into German, but somehow Germans, well, they're not really ridiculous, which is much to their discredit. And so they were really blown away by this structure, this kind of theater performance. And it was written up as one of the best of the year in the theater, Big Theater Journal, so it was quite an exciting event. So what I'd like to do now, just to end, is to show you then this one clip of Ron Tavel in Cheap Jewelry, where you also see Vagina Davis for a moment, and then we will switch to about a 5-minute clip from Ronald Tavel in The Life of Ronald Castro, made in Berlin, 2001. Both of these productions were from 2001. So, Alex, please. So thank you, and I hope that you'll pick up a copy of the book.
By anyone, a man should be able to be women. And women can be men. Why should I always have to live in a city that I don't like? And in a century that I hate? Do you speak my language? Na jawohl! Who are you? Bugs Bunny. I'm going to start the fast this time. And Lana, beautiful Lana Turner, she gets her drink first. It's called the Jill Zonder Lesbiana drink. And the great Mr. Tavel. Oh, star. You get the Schopenhauer.
I love you in all those Jack Benny movies.
Sweetie, you're too kind. Oh.
Yeah, we can just show the second clip.
All right, Fidel Castro, Juanita Castro, Raul Castro, Che Guevara, Herr Ambassador. Please smile into the camera. You are posing for a family portrait. Hold it. Fidel, take out your cigar and light it. Smoke it with great satisfaction. Now, blow some smoke in your sister Juanita's face. Juanita says, stupido. What one? They'll laugh uproariously. Now, Fidel, offer your sister Juanita your cigar. Juanita say very annoyed, stupido. Juanita, take it graciously and smoke. Continue smoking it peacefully, Juanita, and everybody else. Smile into the camera. Juanita, return this cigar to your brother Fidel. To your brother Fidel, Juanita. Fidel, say to Juanita, I discover you apathetic.
I discover you apathetic.
Juanita say, I am apathetic.
I am apathetic.
No soy excitado para la revolución.
No
No soy
excitado por los giros de la revolución de Canadá.
Check. Put your arm around Juanita and say, you are not excited.
You're not excited.
Juanita, I said I am not excited by the revolution.
I said I am not excited by the revolution.
Herr Ambassador, Juanita, the revolution has not turned out good for me.
The revolution has not turned out good for me.
Fidel, silencio.
Silencio!
Juanita, shut up. Your stuff, you always were a spoiled brat.
Shut up with your stuff, you always were well.
Now, Fidel, pinch Juanita's cheek affectionately. Juanita giggled like a little girl. Now, Juanita said to Fidel, you never really cared for peasants.
You never really cared for the poor.
Get very emotional. Say again. You never really cared for the poor, starving, freezing peasants.
Never really cared for the poor, starving, freezing, terrible.
Now, Juanita, think about the poor peasants.
Okay, I have another thing to do. I should just say, actually, it's also an honor to share the stage with Augusto Machado.
Yeah.
To whom I'm forever grateful also, because it was through Augusto that I was able to get contact with Mario Montez. Augusto, Mario's oldest and dearest friend, I believe, in New York, who was always the keeper of the secret as to where Lady Garbo Montez was hiding. And Augusto also, unfortunately, I didn't get to see Augusto play Juanita Castro. But I did get to see Bibi Hansen play Fidel Castro. Bibi played Fidel Castro along. Oh, yeah, I missed. Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed. There's a lot of wonderful Fidels and Juanitas among us. Bibi played Fidel Castro alongside Mario Montez as Juanita in Berlin. Mario, when he agreed to come back to perform as a homage to Ronald Tavel, finally took on the role that Ron actually wrote for him. He wrote that role for him for Andy Warhol's film, but at that time Mario didn't want to do it, and never did until 2009. Because he said that he felt that relations with Cuba had changed. And so he was comfortable doing it. So that was quite a wonderful experience, but I would have also loved to have seen Ruby Lynn Rayner as Fidel. Oh, great, okay. Maybe, could you make me comment?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, I just was sent back up here because Michael Smith sent in a note and asked me to read this, so I'm happy to read this for Michael. He titled it some background to Andy Warhol's ridiculous screenplays. I reviewed some of Ronald Tavel's earliest plays for The Village Voice, and I directed The Life of Juanita Castro in Denver in 1968, and Bigfoot at Theater Genesis in 1972. We were friends for a long time, although I almost never saw him after we both left New York. A year or so after his sudden death in 2009, I realized that his Chain, his novel about Bangkok, which he had shown me in draft form, had not been published. At Jimmy Camicha's suggestion, I got in touch with Harvey Tavel, Ron's brother, who was delighted that I wanted to publish the book. Others had tried to get Ron to change it and ultimately dropped it. Chain is a brilliant book, as Crystal will attest. And I'm proud of how it came out, although it has yet to find many readers. It's on the table outside. Harvey had another book of Ron's that he wanted to see published, entitled The Complete Warhol Screenplays of Ronald Tavel, and he had someone send me a PDF of the manuscript. It was unwieldy, nearly 500 pages, and although I thought some of it was terrific, it was too much for me. I said I could not do it. After Harvey died, still wanting it to be published, Norman Glick, his bereaved husband, got in touch with me about reviving the project. I considered it again and realized there was a wonderful book within that sprawling manuscript, all of which, by the way, is online at ronaldtavel.com. And I hope that David Glick and the Ronald Tavel estate will keep this website alive. It's a tremendous resource. That was my editorial. I'm sure Michael would agree with me. The texts Ron had written to introduce the screenplays, if laid end to end, constitute a beautifully structured and fascinating memoir of his collaboration with Andy Warhol, which, in addition to producing a raft of important films, led to the birth of the Theater of the Ridiculous and Ron's subsequent career as a playwright. It was a lot of work, but Norman said he would pay for it, and I made a budget. Then Norman got sick, and when he said it was his dying wish to have this book published, I had to do it. I'm very happy with the result and glad to present it to you in loving memory of Ronald Tavel, Andy Warhol, Harvey Tavel, and Norman Glick. From Michael Smith.
Well, we're in for a very good treat because we have a living legend that's going to speak now. He's older than I. I'm 39. A bit over 40. But his history with the Chino and all of downtown, he's interviewed regularly because he is the source. So without further ado, we have the wonderful Robert Heide.
Help me to the microphone.
40 and a half.
No, I'll tell him older.
Oh, no, oh, please. Because I know how old I am.
No, I said to somebody recently, they said, because my knowing everything about this and that in the 60s and 50s too, how old are you? And so I'm saying now, I just turned 100. And a friend said to me, you don't look a day over 99. So, but I'm still here. Okay. But anyway, it's great to be here and that this is taking place. David, it's good to meet you. We haven't formally met, but I knew Norman, I knew Ron really well. Great people. And this is your event too. But it's great that it's happening at Theater for the New City, because at Jane Street, Theater for the New City began Crystal and George Bartenio, and so did, I believe, The Lost Continent, Ron's theater. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about Andy Warhol to start with, and then we'll get back to Ron. Now, I first met Andy on Bleecker Street. I was running around with Edward Wallowich, who I had met at Northwestern University. And then he came to the village, and I met his brother John, who was in cabaret. And it was all very, I was drinking a lot of martinis and taking whatever. And just the madness of the 60s. I mean, you've all heard, if you remember the 60s, you weren't there. And I think that's sometimes the case with me. Not so much the 60s, but people say, when did you do that play? Or what was the date of that? I said, tell you the truth, I don't remember. The decades have all begun to merge into one. And that's okay, because there's always somebody to look it up on Wikipedia. And instant gratification. But, so Edward said, I want you to meet someone. And it was a place called Aldo's where later became Manitou's on Bleecker Street for a long time. But at Aldo's, it was a gay club with white tablecloths and a restaurant. And so he brought me there, and there is this creature with white hair, and it was Andy Warhol. And I think this was about 1961. And, you know, folk music was going on and everything was happening. And he seemed very weird to me, and there was this kind of aura around him. Oh, gee, you know, nice to meet you. Very, very quiet. Okay. And then he started hanging out. John Wallowich had a salon where he had singers like Eartha Kitt coming, and Alice Gosley from New Faces, and people came there and entertained Rosemary O'Reilly. And so I was invited there, and one time I'm coming through the door, and Edward's coming out of this little room, and then Andy emerges. They've been having a little tryst there. And so that, I saw him a lot at that time, and then later didn't see him at all until 1965 when I did The Bed at the Cafe Chino. The Bed wasn't the first play for two men. There was another early play called West of the Moon about a male hustler down on his luck. In fact, luck was his name. And on one hand he has written love, on the other hand he has written hate. He's in a doorway in Greenwich Village. He's kind of down and out, and, you know, drugs and stuff. But this play came out of a friend had worked for a famous, I shouldn't say who he is, but he was a famous conductor for Broadway musicals. And he would sometimes, you know, this friend was working as a secretary, and he said, what is this in the account? Orchidea, what is that? There's a lot of money there. He says, well, you know, I do my conducting, then I go to Sardi's, and I eat, and it's 1 o'clock or 1:30, and I'm feeling still up. So I called this number, and a man comes over and gives me a massage. But it wasn't just that. You know, it was obviously, and so this story came out of this idea of this down and out hustler. Well, the reason I'm going on about this is that this was done off Broadway with another play that I wrote called Hector, which was a monologue play. But 6 critics descended on it. It was Lee Payton produced her. She was known around off-Broadway circles as Lee Nagrin later, but she married Daniel McGreen. And I think it was Judith Chris went up to her and said, where did you get the money to put on these plays? Because the word had gotten around that this was a homosexual play. You couldn't write about homosexuality in the theater or use the word gay in the New York Times. So I was told, Robert Heide will never write another play again. You're going to get me to stop talking? You're going to adjust that so I can scream into it?
I'm diplomatically adjusting my garment. Can we talk about because we have an intermission?
Okay, you have an intermission. I'm talking to it. I'll say one thing about this play. Robert Heide will never write another play again. Robert Heide should go home and break his typewriter over his hands. Anyway, I did later write the bad Andy Warhol film. Now, I wanted to talk a little about Ronnie. Ronnie, I knew from the Warhol scene and downtown, and the theater of the absurd, the theater of the ridiculous. At the Chino, it was called super realism. wasn't so much absurd or ridiculous. It was like confronting the audience and doing whatever. We called Ronnie Turhan out of Turhan Bay because of the Arabian Nights, and he always seemed very exotic to me. Later on, there was a company formed by Irene Fornes and Julie Bellasso called New York Playwrights Strategy, where playwrights directed their own work and wrote plays on a grant. And it was just, and Ron did a play called The Ovens of Anita Orange Juice. Anita Bryant screaming and yelling about gays, let's get rid of those gays. And and it was a screaming, wild play and a confrontational play. I had written a play called Suburban Tremens about my family and everything falling about in the suburbs, but I won't go into that. But Ron began to hang out at Boots and Saddles, and I saw a lot of him there. And we had a great time. And we talked about Andy, and there was the thing where Ron had a falling out at one time with Andy Warhol, and I didn't know what it was about. And Andy had filmed The Bed, and it was his first split screen, which is now, among a lot of films, I'm sure Ron's as well, these films are being re-digitized by the Warhol Museum and the MoMA and the Whitney, so they'll all be brand new. You know, I don't know how long it's going to take, but it is happening, and the money has come forth. So it'll be The Bed and Ron's plays and stuff like that. But so, you know, there's a lot of excitement about that. I think I lost my train there. I was talking about something. What was I talking about?
Your zipper's down.
My zipper's down? Better zip it up. Zip, zip. Okay. Well, listen. What'd you say? He's giving you a sign to shut up? Have I talked too much? Yeah, we have to have an intermission. So listen, everybody, it's great to be here. This is family and friends and strangers. My childhood friend Norma is here. We knew one another since the age of 5, and Norma just turned 39, I think, right, Norma? Jack Benny's age. Okay.
Now we have an intermission. There's food and refreshments, but may I invite you to sign the guest book and look at the wonderful mementos of Norman Glick.